Hi, I'm Zephyr, and I'm going to be reading from my book, The Adventure of It All, which can be found on Amazon. It's a memoir about my trips to Europe and around the world. The first trip to Europe was taken on I did it on a mobility scooter all by myself, and I spent an entire month in Europe, traveling across 6 countries. That is part one of the book, and part two is my trip to 14 countries across 5 continents in 38 days in an electric wheelchair by myself. And those trips changed my life. And I learned before, during, and after that many disabled people don't feel like traveling is even an option. Like, aside from the money, like, the money's definitely an issue, but people don't think that the world is accessible, and it's not. It really isn't accessible. The US is by far the most accessible place I have ever been to, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. There are always ways around things, and so I'm going to be reading some of my book. This video will be part 1, chapter 1, titled Before. My mom and I were incredibly close. For a long time, it was just us. Anywhere we went, I stayed close to her, afraid of the world outside of her personal bubble. She was warmth and red hair and wisdom all in one. She was the epitome of comfort and love. I knew that if I held on to her, I wouldn't get lost. She would get after me for sitting so close to her all of the time, but she was safe. The rest of the world was absolutely terrifying to me. I was always a scared child. I hated going outside to play. When my mom would insist that I go outside and get some fresh air, I would take my dolls out onto the back step and sit there, watching the other children in my neighborhood with untrusting and fearful eyes. Once, when I was 7 years old, I was walking home from the bus stop after school, and my neighbor's chihuahua was loose. He was running around the street, yipping his little head off, happy to be free. To me, though, he might as well have been a dragon protecting his lair. My apartment building was on the other side of his lair. The only defense strategy? To hide behind a tree at the end of our street. When my mom noticed that all of the kids had gone home already, and I was nowhere to be seen, she poked her head out of the door and asked one of the kids where I was. Now that I'm an adult, even though I don't have a child of my own, I can appreciate the fear that must have gone through my mom. Children go missing every single day. It could have been me that day. When I was 11 years old, it came out that my stepfather had sexually abused me for most of my childhood. He was arrested and sent to prison. I was sent to therapy. My family seemed to take a large step back from me after that. I felt as though I were a monster who they no longer trusted. My mother especially seemed unsure of how to deal with me. We fought constantly. I was severely depressed, anxious, and more afraid of the world than I'd ever been before. My mom was fighting to get through her own depression and anxiety. She went back to school, got a job, got a car, got off of welfare, and trudged forward. I, however, was stuck. I stayed in my bedroom, sitting on my bed, lost in my dissociations. I was endlessly bouncing between normal teenage angst and severe mental illness. I doubt my mom knew which was which at any point. I was recently going through some papers that my mom had kept. After she passed away, I realized that she might have had a bit of an issue with hoarding paperwork and unopened mail. I found bank statements, still sealed, from 20 years before she died. One of the papers that I found was the results of a standardized test that I took in the 9th grade. The results weren't anything to be proud of. Surprisingly, I did better in math than reading. I think that might be the only test I ever took that had those results. But something caught my eye. When the test asked me what I wanted to do in the future, I had said travel. The results page suggested that I speak to my school counselor about that. 14-year-old me was lost. I had no idea what I really wanted to do when I grew up. Growing up wasn't something I thought would actually happen. I was too suicidal. I had no real dreams. I loved writing poetry filled with teenage angst, listening to pop music and daydreaming about my newest crush of the week. I was trying to be cool by smoking cigarettes. I floated through life without any real dreams, failing school along the way. I was headed toward nowhere. So, when I wrote travel down, I'm not sure I meant to another country. I might have, though. I might have meant France, since I was taking French that year. But I think mostly I meant away from the trauma and away from the fear and away from everything that I was at that moment. It took me almost 20 years to figure myself out, and even now, I still haven't totally achieved a full understanding of who I am, where I'm going, or what I'm doing with my life. I may never achieve any of that. Had my mother not passed away when she did, I may not have been able to travel or discover my passion, although I will always stand by the fact that I would have chosen her over traveling or any of my dreams. I will always grieve her death, especially how it happened, and that I was never able to say goodbye to her. Stay tuned for part 1, chapter 2.